Welcome to another edition of the Upper Bowl Perspective, a Utah Jazz podcast giving you an Upper Bowl point of view with courtside quality. Joined as always by my co-host Kyler. I won't be able to say that about Landon going forward. He had some stuff he had to deal with today. We're wishing him the best and hope that he'll be with us next week. But for this week, it'll just be me and Kyler giving you some more new Jazz takes. For the episode today, we're going to talk, as always, a little bit more about the Jazz, but the biggest news we've received in the last week and a half or so is that purportedly that talks between the Jazz and the Knicks over a potential Donovan Mitchell trade have stalled. According to multiple sources, it looks like there hasn't been much headway for as much as 3 weeks in terms of real talks between these two franchises. However, there were reports that there were 2 other teams that the Jazz are engaged in lengthier talks about a potential Donovan Mitchell trade, which is the Washington Wizards and the Charlotte Hornets. 2 teams that I don't think make a ton of sense for a Donovan Mitchell trade, but because it's Jazz news and because it's the offseason, we're definitely going to talk about it. What we're going to do is that we're going to go through each of these teams. I'm going to read off Kyler what are the things that these teams could potentially trade for in a Donovan Mitchell trade. I'll give you an overview of what picks they have that they can trade. I'll also let you know some of the young players they have, and then I'll give you a few players that might need to be thrown in for salary matching purposes. So, Kyler, let's go ahead and start with the Wizards. I will give you these different assets that they have, and you tell me what you think a good, fair Donovan Mitchell trade could potentially look like. So for the Wizards, I got to pull this up. I don't have it all memorized. For their picks, they have all of their future first-round picks except for 2023. So if the Jazz are looking for picks, they could trade up to 3 future firsts and 3 future pick swaps. As far as young players go, they have Corey Kispert, Denny Avdia, Johnny Davis, and Rui Hachimura are their players that are still on rookie contracts. And potential salary matching players are Daniel Gafford, Kristaps Porzingis, Kyle Kuzma, and DeLon Wright. Not quite as fun of a trade package to talk about as the New York Knicks, but there's definitely some good pieces in there. If you were Danny Ainge on the phone with the Wizards, what would you be asking for in a Donovan Mitchell trade, assuming that it's going to be some combination of the pieces that I just read out?
I mean, the 3 picks and all the pick swaps. So it would be because their 2023 pick is lottery protected, so they can't even trade their 2024 right now. So it'd be their 2025, 7, and 9 unprotected picks, and then the pick swaps in 28 and 26 is what I would want. So that gives you, in theory, maybe 5 good picks maximum, and then of their young guys, Rui Hachimura, I don't see the Jazz wanting just because he's close to a contract extension. Corey Kispert, a wing that can shoot. He's white. The Jazz probably think he's good.
I was looking for that next Joe Ingles, right? That's the Jazz for you.
Yeah, and so, I mean, he's not as big as Joe Ingles, but so Corey Kispert, but is he kind of like like you have Johnny Davis too, but Johnny Davis, just because he recently signed a contract, couldn't be included in packages yet. It would be a in-season trade if it's Johnny Davis. So like you're either talking about waiting till in-season to get Johnny Davis and Corey Kispert, or like a Corey Kispert base package, which neither sound that great. And just for like, there's been a lot of talk of like the Knicks, the Jalen Brunson, Donovan Mitchell backcourt pairing isn't good. Like Bradley Beal and Donovan Mitchell is not a good, like if you just want to get straight buckets and play basically street ball, then yeah, that's fantastic backcourt, but for NBA basketball, that's not what you're looking for in a complementary duo in the backcourt.
Yeah, which that's why I thought it was interesting that the Wizards were like rumored to be fairly lengthy in these trade talks, because I completely agree. I love Bradley Beal. I love Donovan Mitchell, just on separate teams. I think you put them in a backcourt together. They're both undersized guards. They're both very score first. None of them are fantastic playmakers, but they would probably average 55 a game for you combined, which would be fun for Wizards fans, but not really fun for the rest of the Wizards players who are really going to be touching the ball and maybe not having the best of time playing for that team. But Kyler, there was one player that you didn't mention that I actually would be more interested in than maybe some of the other ones that was brought up, which was Denny Avdia. I mean, like, you know me, I loved Denny Avdia coming out of the draft. I think he was the number 3 guy on my big board that year. I would have to go back and double check. But Avdia, you've got like kind of a combo forward who can shoot, who's got length, who's got a good first step. I mean, he's not the most athletic guy in the world, but he's shown flashes here and there of being a really solid NBA rotation player. And I think that he's only kind of cracked the surface in terms of what he could be, seeing as he was such a highly touted recruit. Do you think I'm maybe overvaluing Denny Avdia in this trade? Because I think he's the second most valuable player we would want. I think Corey Kispert would be one. I think Avdia would be the second player we would want the most in terms of like a Jazz rebuild. But am I overvaluing him, or do you think I'm undervaluing him?
I mean, he's a foreign, tall, white guy. You're overvaluing him. That's not even a question. I just think he's fine. Like, I don't think he excels at any one thing, which we've kind of talked about off air. Is I like guys who can come in and they excel at something, because then you have something to build around, other than having to work on every single part of someone's game. I mean, you always work on it, even if you're good at it already. But just like, there's not one single thing that Denny Avdia does when he gets on the court that I'm like, yes, I'm glad he's on the court to do that thing. And so he's fine, I guess. But I honestly think the Wizards, I don't think they could pull off the trade this offseason. I think it would have to be a mid-season trade involving Johnny Davis, because that's like the most interesting one, because he's got 4 years left, or 3.5 at that point. And then Corey Kispert will have 2.5. And so you got guys that you could see for multiple years how they develop, because Denny Avdia is now going into his 3rd year, so he would have 2 years if we traded him now, or just 1.5 left if we traded for him mid-season. So that's why I think Kispert is the most valuable, and then Johnny Davis, just because I'm not like super excited about any of these prospects, just mind you, but you just want time, as much time as possible before you have to pay them, to see if they're actually can exceed what my expectations and probably what the Jazz expectations are for them.
Yeah. All right. So let's just say hypothetical here. Let's just say that New York comes out, publicly says we're not trading for Donovan Mitchell. The price is too high. And we have like 100% degree certainty in the situation that the Jazz are not going to be able to trade Donovan Mitchell to the Knicks for whatever reason, right? If the Wizards come to the Jazz and say, hey, for Donovan Mitchell, we will offer you those 3 firsts that we talked about, those 2 pick swaps. We will also give you Corey Kispert, Denny Avdia. You can have a 1.5 years of Rui Hachimura, and we'll throw in, let's just say, Kyle Kuzma for salary match. So those 4 players, the 3 picks, the 2 pick swaps, knowing that the New York deal is off the table, would you take that, or would you wait for something better? I think it's a tough question, because I've been thinking about this all morning, and I'm not 100% sure what I would say.
I even think, like we talked about before, like there's no rumors that the Magic are interested, but like I think the Magic have more intriguing packages. I wouldn't just say straight up yes. And the thing with the Knicks, I think they'd be willing to pay that level of a price, just like 3 picks. I think the Knicks would pay 3 picks. The problem is the Jazz are asking for 6 picks. And so I even like just the Knicks 3 picks. Although, like, you're talking about a team that's never really that good, and you're talking about the Wizards, so yeah, their future picks are enticing, but they're always like a team that's more in like the 9 to 14 range. They're not the team that gets the top 5 picks. So yeah, I mean, late lottery picks have resulted in a lot of really good players over the last several years, no doubt, but just you're talking about not as valuable picks. I'd rather try to squeeze. I'd knock on the door of the Kings and see if they can beat that Wizards offers, just because they have also intriguing young players and even like a worse track record of like maybe the picks will be better. So
basically, to sum up, gun to your head right now, you say, I'm not saying no. I'm still telling the Wizards that I'm thinking about it and I may come back to it. But you still think that there's potentially better offers that you would like better, but you think it's still generally in the range.
Yeah, I mean, what I would do is I'd say, thank you, Wizards, for your offer. And then I would use that offer and go to other teams and say, like, hey, beat this offer. Because I think other teams would. So
Well, it's definitely an interesting thought exercise because there's a lot of players on the Wizards that their young roster that I love. I mean, like specifically Denny Avdia, and I think that Corey Kispert has a lot of potential. I think their picks are going to be good, but honestly, if I were in the same position, I would do the same thing as you. I think it's a solid offer. I think it's something that might be worth considering, especially if you do a midseason trade and can get Johnny Davis, who, despite a terrible summer league performance, I still think has like more potential than he's currently like being talked about as in right now. Like some people are already labeling Johnny Davis as a bust, and I think it's way too
Don't
early to say
overreact to
that.
summer league, man. Like that will kill you. There's
Every time. Every
So.
time. But let's talk about another team that may have an interesting trade package who is also rumored to be in talks with the Jazz, which is the Hornets. So once again, we'll go through the same thing. We'll go through their picks. We'll go through their young players and then potentially salary matchers to come up with what a trade could look like. So the picks that they have, and we're just talking about firsts, is that they have the 2023 first from Denver, and then they have all of their future first-round picks from 2024 onwards. So they could trade up to potentially 4 future firsts and 3 pick swaps maximum. As far as young players, they have Mark Williams, who they just drafted this year out of Duke. He was the second center taken in the draft compared to Walker Kessler, who was taken third. They also have James Bouknight, JT Thor, Kai Jones, and PJ Washington. And potentially salary matching players would be Gordon Hayward, who could potentially have a reunion back to the Jazz. Kelly Oubre. He would definitely get bought out. But the more likely ones are potentially Kelly Oubre or Terry Rozier. So there are some more pick options. There's some different players who are younger, maybe somewhat more intriguing than some of the ones on the Wizards. But if you were Danny Ainge, once again calling the Hornets, what would you be asking for Donovan Mitchell?
Man, it would just be absolutely hilarious if the Jazz traded for 2 picks from the 2022 NBA draft and they were both centers. Oh, that would be nuts. I would be so sad, honestly. Like if we came out of this draft with the second and third best center, and I would just be ashamed to be a Jazz fan. But I mean, theoretically, just from the Hornets side, I'll answer your question here in a second. I like the Donovan and LaMelo pairing more than I do either of the Knicks or the Wizards, because LaMelo has the length and the playmaking skills that Donovan lacks. So I think they're a lot more complementary. Neither's great at defense, but LaMelo theoretically could be a good defender just because of his length. But I just don't know about this Hornet. I thought the Hornets were a better trade partner with the Jazz before this draft because they had the 13th and 14th picks. So they had 2 picks this year that you could have thrown in along with, the future picks. They could have done 24, 6, 8 after that as well. So you could have had as many as 5 picks. Now that that's gone, though, I'm not as intrigued, especially when you have a player like LaMelo who's probably giving them a floor through the entirety of how long they can send those picks. Like he's still got like 5 years of team control or something like that left. So maybe 5 or 6, I can't remember. So like those picks, they're not going to be high lottery picks because LaMelo just like makes his teammates so much better to the point that they're probably out, like their floor is kind of what they were this year, I would say, and kind of like a early teens pick. So in terms of, I'm a Donovan fan and I want Donovan to go to a good situation. This is my favorite of the 3, but in terms of also a Jazz fan, this is my least favorite package.
So like if you're Danny Ainge, would you even be considering like a deal with the Hornets?
I mean, I think because you said they don't have their 2023 pick. Is that what you said?
They don't have their 2023 pick.
So they could
but they do have Denver's. But they do have Denver's.
Okay, so they could send Denver's and then either 4, 6, 8 or 7 or 5, 7, 9.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's the same. I mean, if it's the same picks as the Wizards, I'd rather have the Wizards picks, and I'd rather have the Wizards young players. Like James Bouknight is fine, but he's like an undersized 2 guard, and or a decently sized point guard who's not a good enough playmaker to be a point guard. So
yeah, and like I'm not super high on Kai Jones. Like PJ Washington, he's going to get paid. Like same with Kai Jones, like he's getting ready for a contract extension. So
I'm like Mark Williams, I like better than Walker Kessler, but you just got Walker Kessler, so I don't want both.
Exactly, and we don't want both. So I think that the Hornets and the Wizards, if you're not the Jazz, if you're looking at potential trade packages for an all-star level player, I think they're very similar packages in terms of what they could offer and like how valuable they would be on the trade market. But I definitely agree that the Wizards are the better trade partner for the Jazz if it doesn't work out with the Knicks or with one of these other teams that we've talked about before, whether that be maybe we do give Orlando a call or maybe we do end up working something out with the Kings, which is rumored about 6 weeks ago. So I am totally with you. Out of these two packages, let's leave the Wizards on the line. Maybe use the Hornets as leverage if we talk to them a little bit more. But I think there are better trade packages out there, especially as the trade market just for players in general and the availability of all-star level players is becoming less and less as we get closer to the season. I think Donovan's value is actually going to increase a little bit just as certain teams get more desperate to finalize their rosters as they make a push into this 2023 season.
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of think about it from the Knicks perspective here, like we talked about, these are the teams that are rumored interested in Donovan, and neither of these packages are very inspiring. So if I'm the Knicks, I'm like, go find an offer that's close to what we can give you, because like honestly, a Grimes or Kispert, I'd probably rather have Grimes, and then so you're also talking about like you want me to beat the Wizards by 3 first-round picks. If I'm the Knicks, I'm saying no. Like I'll beat them by a pick. I'll slightly edge out their offer, and so that's probably why those talks have stalled, because the Knicks are saying, look, there's no one even close to us as an offer, so we're not giving you that. Like we'll give you a little bit better than the next best offer you can get. And so I think this kind of gives you an idea of, I think, why those talks have stalled. It's because the Jazz want the Knicks to beat the second best offer by a mile, and the Knicks just aren't willing to do that.
Yeah. Which is very interesting, knowing that we have Danny Ainge, who is always trying to milk every little thing out of a trade that he can. He showed that at Boston for years, and he showed that again that he's able to do it with Utah in what he's able to get for the Rudy Gobert trade. We're definitely at this interesting spot where it seemed like 2 weeks ago, a Donovan Mitchell trade was like a done deal. It was absolutely going to happen. Now the trade talks have stalled. It sounds like the Jazz are talking to other teams, whether that's for leverage or for actually wanting to trade him, to other teams like the Wizards and the Hornets, who don't have as good a packages, anywhere near as close good a package as they were asking the New York Knicks. So just before we end this segment, Kyler, what do you think the chances are that Donovan Mitchell starts the season in a Jazz uniform? And then as a follow-up question, what do you think the chances are that post-trade deadline he's also in a Jazz uniform?
Oh, man. I think the second part of that question is really tricky. The first part, I think that's going ever more like an inevitability. Wow, words. But so just because I think that's kind of the stalemate, and I don't think it's going to change. Danny Ainge doesn't want, the slightly better offer from the Knicks than the rest of the market, and the Knicks don't want to pay, 3 picks more than anyone else is willing to pay for, or able to pay at least, for Donovan. So I think that stalemate is going to last. There's always like, when training camp starts, did the Jazz just want Donovan Mitchell out of here? I think that's going to depend on what Donovan Mitchell's attitude is when he comes to training camp. I think that's kind of the one swing factor, is Donovan himself. I think he's the only one that's going to be able to push this to be a likely thing before the season. As much as I don't want Donovan to play in these stupid uniforms of this color scheme that is behind me today, as much as I don't want that to happen, it's becoming more and more likely. By the trade deadline, I think that's very interesting, because the Jazz, I think by then, will be motivated to trade him. But like, if the Knicks are who we think they are, right, and they're not one piece away, like, are they going to be motivated to make the midseason move for Donovan? Like, is Donovan going to push them over the hump? I almost think they have to be better than expected next year. Like, already, like, the Knicks are the 5th or 6th seed, and like, acquiring Donovan could put them up to like the 3rd seed in the East. Maybe that will be motivating for them. If they're on the outside looking in, are the Knicks going to be motivated to acquire Donovan to become the 6th or 7th seed in the East? I don't know if their package is going to increase. So like I almost say like root for the Knicks to kind of almost be successful next year, so that they think that Donovan Mitchell actually puts them into like a more contending stratosphere. As much as I don't want to root for the Knicks, I almost think that's would be more of a motivation for them.
So, final answer, what's the percentage that he starts in a Jazz uniform versus being on another team, both at the start of the season and after the trade deadline?
Starts 70, trade deadline 26.3.
Very specific. I like it. All right. Well, we've talked about a lot of Donovan potential trade scenarios. I did not think that we would be having a 20-minute segment on the Wizards and the Hornets. But Jazz fans, there you have it, because we love bringing you all the latest Jazz information, even if it's maybe something different than what we would usually talk about. We'll be back in just a minute with segment 2, where we're going to be talking more about just a preview of the Western Conference and where the Jazz's roster, as they're currently constructed, fits within the Western Conference. We'll be back in just a second.
All right. See you in a minute.
Welcome back for segment 2 of this edition of the Upper Bowl Perspective, a Western Conference preview. Now, as we've been talking to a lot of our Jazz friends, it seems like a lot of them are in a position where they talk about the Jazz's, oh, well, next year we still have Donovan Mitchell. We can still be like somewhat competitive in the West. And I don't think that we agree in a lot of sense, just based on how our current roster is constructed. So we're going to have this segment where we're going to talk about, let's just assume that the Jazz make no more trades or moves between now and the start of the season. Their current roster, even with Donovan Mitchell, how would they compare to the other teams in the West? We're going to start off by going off within the Jazz's division where they would rank, and then we're going to talk more about where would they rank in the West. Are they like one of the 6 playoff teams? Are they one of the 4 play-in teams? Or are they just out of the playoffs completely? So that's kind of what we're going to do, is talk about it. But first, before we go into this exercise, let's first talk about what is the Jazz's roster today. And Kyler, I was just even looking at what our potential starting 5 would look like, and it's not super pretty, or what our 7-man rotation look like, and it's not super pretty.
We'd have more than 7. We'd have to.
Yeah.
Like 7's way too few to go through 82 games with, but
yeah. But like, even if you look at our top 9, like after the first few, the quality drops off pretty significantly. We're looking at Donovan Mitchell. We're looking at Mike Conley, Jordan Clarkson, Jared Butler, Malik Beasley. We're looking at Bojan Bogdanovic. We're looking at Jared Vanderbilt, Walker Kessler, Udoka Azubuike. I think that's our top 9 players. Did I miss anyone? I was just doing that off of memory.
Patrick Beverley would play over Jared Butler.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
As the backup point guard. Whether I would want him to or not, I've kind of made my stance on Patrick Beverley clear, but he would play over Jared Butler just because Jared Butler showed no improvement over Summer League, and Patrick Beverley is a proven guy that's worthy of rotation minutes.
Yeah. Thank you. I sometimes forget that Patrick Beverley's on the Jazz right now because it's better for my mental health. But thank you for correcting me that he would definitely be part of our smaller guard rotation. So looking at that is not a great starting lineup. Sure, we have Donovan Mitchell, who's a great player. We have Mike Conley, who's been solid for us. Bojan Bogdanovic. Jared Vanderbilt was really good for the Timberwolves. We have Jordan Clarkson coming off the bench, but a lot of that roster is really, really rough. Right now, either Walker Kessler or Udoka Azubuike is our starting center, which is a little bit of a terrifying thought if you want to win basketball games. So let's first talk about where would the Jazz rank in terms of the Northwest Division. So the 5 teams in the division are the Utah Jazz, the Denver Nuggets, the Minnesota Timberwolves, the Oklahoma City Thunder, the Portland Trail Blazers. Kyler, out of those 5 teams, just as rosters are currently constructed, is the Jazz better than any of them? Are we even better than OKC?
I mean, you're projecting. Let's not forget, Mike Conley took a step back in the playoffs. Let's not take away from what he was in the regular season. He's still a very good shooter. and he can throw lobs. Who he's going to throw them to anymore is beyond my capabilities. But just like he's a starting caliber player. I see the Jazz as having three like legitimate starting caliber players, which you kind of want five, but we have three. We have Mike, Boyan, and Donovan. All are guys that you are comfortable with starting, and you're not cringing a little bit if they're in your starting lineup. And the borderline guy is Jared Vanderbilt. I think in some lineups he's a starting caliber player. I think with the Jazz current construction, you don't want him starting. He's more of a complementary forward or stretch five, i.e. Karl Anthony Towns like last year. And so like those three, like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander's good, but like just next year alone, as much as I'd rather watch Oklahoma City Thunder play basketball, you'd have to think that the veteran savvy of the three Jazz guys who have two of whom have been all-stars. If you want to fight against the legitimacy of Mike Conley's all-star, I would not give a rebuttal. But I just think we could beat Oklahoma City next year. Although they would have a massive size advantage on us. But Portland made some improvements. I think the additions they've made have put them ahead of us. Denver's obviously the best team in the division. And then Minnesota, obviously above us as well. So,
which I think Minnesota is going to be a very good regular season team. I think if you're talking playoff basketball, I don't think Minnesota is going to be as Denver, but I would not even be surprised if Minnesota won more games than Denver in the regular season.
It's very possible. Rudy Gobert's an elite regular season player.
Yep. And then we'll see if he's able to play hopefully better in this playoffs when he's paired with Karl Anthony Towns rather than somebody else who can't stretch the floor as well. So let's talk a little bit more about in terms of the West. And let's just play a game where we choose the 6 playoff teams. We kind of align on the 4 play-in teams and the 5 teams that are just out of the playoffs completely. So just off the top of your head, because I have my list here, I do have some that are kind of question marks that if I switch them, like it doesn't matter because I put them more or less at the same level. But which teams for you, Kyler, up to 6 are you're for sure going to be in the top 6 of the West next year, barring there's no injuries?
Man, honestly, the West is really tricky because like Dallas got worse. I have no idea what Dallas is going to be, but just the absolutes, Golden State, Denver, and Phoenix, since they were able to bring back DeAndre Ayton, I think those are the 3 guys that are on top. Honestly, I think those are the only 3 that I would like actually put money on to make the playoffs next year. Unless I'm forgetting one, I probably am. But like the Clippers are obviously there if they stay healthy, which for this exercise, I'm going to put them there. Mm-hmm. Luka by himself, I'm going to still put him there, even though I have serious doubts about what he's surrounded with right now.
Mm-hmm. And then I had those 5, and then I had those 5, then I had 2 more that I had in like hard consideration, which were the Memphis Grizzlies, who were really good last season.
I think I forgot. Memphis is definitely.
Which I mean, like they were like in my like top for sure. And then I kind of had Minnesota as kind of like one of the fringe. Like I could see them be second in the West just because they're such a good regular season team. I could also see them like fighting for a play-in spot. I think they're like where they're going to sit at the end of the regular season. They have the biggest variance of any of these teams that we could see being really good in the regular season. So I kind of had Minnesota as you tell me they're for sure top 6. I'm not really going to argue it. You tell me they might be a play-in. I'm not going to argue it either.
I'd actually put both of those teams ahead of. This might look really bad in hindsight, like when we come back to this come playoff time. But I'm just so weirded out about what Dallas is. I mean, I like Christian Wood, but as your second best player, I would put both of those teams in the top 6, and I would put Dallas actually, I guess now in the play-in.
Yeah. I had Dallas in my iffy tier. And then with the Denver Nuggets, assuming that everyone stays healthy, I think they're going to be good. There is that little bit of worry about is Michael Porter Jr., is he going to be able to play really much at all this season? Is Jamal Murray going to come back stronger than he was before his injury? There's a lot of question marks with the Denver Nuggets, but they also have the back-to-back MVP in Nikola Jokic. So I feel like their ceiling is, or their floor is still pretty high, just because when you have a guy like Jokic, you're going to win a lot of basketball games. So I think we kind of have that tier of Denver, if, their guys can play, Dallas, depending on what Luka can carry on his back, along with, it's like Minnesota and everybody else, just kind of in that general range. So then who would you have kind of as your next tier, Kyler, as the teams that are almost certainly going to make the play-in, but probably not going to be a top 6 team?
Okay, well, we already talked about, I think Dallas is the first team to put in there. I think a healthy Dame and Portland is going to fight for a play-in team. I just think they're going to be a lot better this year. I would say that the Pelicans are there as well, for sure. I'd actually put them ahead of Dallas. Man, there's like so many. I think the top 3 is there, and then I think there's just so many question marks after that. And then lastly, I mean, as much as I just crapped on it, like I could just as easily see Oklahoma City sucking as I could see them playing in the play-in next year. They're a high variance team for sure, just because of all their youth. I'm probably missing someone. You go ahead and tell me who I'm missing. I don't have the list in front of me like you do.
Yeah. No, I mean, like, we hit just about everybody. The one team that I think we need to bring up in this category is the Lakers, just because they have LeBron and AD. I mean,
yeah,
with LeBron and AD, especially if AD comes back better, and if Russ can learn how to be a better teammate on the court at this stage of his career, then who knows what could happen with the Lakers. But that was kind of everyone that I had in that tier of, could they be fighting for a play-in seed? And is this where you would put the Jazz, or would you put the Jazz, like, are there any of those teams you talked about in this tier that you would say the Jazz are better at as they're currently constructed?
Okay, let's talk about it. The Mavs, they won a game without Luka, so no. The Pelicans, no. The Lakers, if both of their stars are healthy, no. And what was the last team? I'm already forgetting. I'm having some brain farts, but no. I think the Jazz are easily worse than all those teams. Is basically what I'm trying to say. Like, if you like stack up the lineups side by side, there's like there's more like young people that you think might get better on the other teams, and B, just more talent. And the other one was the Trailblazers. Yeah, like Dame, talk about a guy that's going to wreck the Jazz for 40 points a game in the playoffs. Dame personifies that. So,
Yeah. So now let's talk about the teams that are probably not even going to be fighting for the play-in, which I know you don't have the list in front of you. So I'll just kind of read out some of the teams that I had in this category, which probably Oklahoma City, just because it's a year too early. I still think they're going to be really good here in a couple of years, but next year they still have a lot of young guys who are going to need to get better.
Yep.
So you have OKC. I also had the Sacramento Kings, just because I don't think they're going to put it together, despite me liking a lot of their players. The Houston Rockets, once again, they just had the 3rd overall pick in the draft. I think Jabari Smith is going to be good, but even with their draft pick last year, there's still a lot of work they need to do there. So I think the Rockets are a little bit early before they're going to be seriously looking at playing games. And then the San Antonio Spurs, they just traded their best player, DeJounte Murray, to the Hawks. And it looks like the Spurs are going through some sort of a version of a rebuild, even though Greg Popovich is still the head coach. But those are the 4 players that if you told me that they were really like solidly in the play-in, I would be a little bit surprised. Do you disagree with any of those?
I wouldn't be surprised of OKC, just because I said, like, they might be really good defensively next year. I think they're not going to be great offensively, but like they are so long, and that is like a large part of playing defense, which, the Jazz have been the opposite of, which is why they can't play defense. So I wouldn't be surprised if they're like the 9th or 10th seed. I'd be surprised if they were a straight up top 6 seed, but if the Thunder replaced the Lakers, I would not be surprised at all. Just because of the health of the aging stars in LA. But yeah, the other one, San Antonio, I think is like the worst. They're like barely starting a retool. They don't really have young players to build around yet. They're firmly in the, waste for Wemby conversation. The Rockets, like you said, they're just barely started. They're like OKC, but 2 years ago, they're starting kind of their full tilt rebuild. So I would be utterly shocked. Again, if the Jazz ended up with the 10 seed, I wouldn't be shocked either. So I guess the Thunder and the Jazz are the two that I wouldn't be shocked if they would end up in the play-in. I just don't think either of them will be.
Yeah. I mean, I think the Jazz for sure are going to have a better team next year, assuming they have Donovan, than San Antonio, than the Rockets, and also the Kings, just because I just don't like the way that the Kings roster is constructed, and they find a way to screw everything up that happens to them.
It's weird, but they could be a regular season team. They might squeak in. Like, Sabonis, again, is a guy who's probably better regular season than playoffs. And, like, Sabonis and Fox really hit it off. If that continues, perhaps. But so I guess there's only 2 teams.
Really good last year. So yeah, there are only 2 teams right now in the Western Conference that the Jazz, that we can say definitively, we feel a high degree of confidence the Jazz, if they keep their roster as is currently constructed with Donovan Mitchell, are going to be better than next year.
We might be the 13th seed with Donovan Mitchell on our roster.
Exactly. And I mean, like, let's just say best case scenario that maybe for some reason we do match up well with OKC and we're able to beat them. Or maybe, I don't know, like just going back to the list, it's hard to say, like, maybe the Lakers, if they're having, like if they have a problem with Westbrook or if LeBron finally starts to look old. But so many of these situations, it's like, it's hard for us to confidently say that the Jazz are even like a bona fide play-in team with their current roster. And to all of our friends who tell us the Jazz can contend next year, that the Jazz can still be a playoff team next year, I think I'm just going to send them this podcast and tell them to go to segment 2, because this is why we've been talking about the rebuild, right? Because after the Rudy Gobert trade, we had Donovan Mitchell. We have a Mike Conley, who still played really good last year, but he's aging and he's small. We have Jordan Clarkson, who's better as a bench player. We have Bojan Bogdanovic, who's a quality starter in the league, but he's also getting a little bit older. And, maybe not as quick as he was defensively a couple of years ago. So this is why we want to rebuild, right? This is why we want to trade Donovan Mitchell. It's not because we want the Jazz to suck. It's because the Jazz are probably going to suck anyway. And why would we rather not suck more now so that we actually have a future where we may be good in a few years from now?
Well, I mean, even like the 13th seed is going to be a pretty high draft pick. And like next year's top 10, it looks juicy. Let me tell you that. Like, I don't think it's going to be like there's obviously going to be tiers, but I think the second tier of next year's draft is going to be really, really good. Mm-hmm. But so I don't even hate it that much. I'm just saying, like, Donovan with 3 years left on his deal is worth more than Donovan with 2 years left on his deal, which is worth more than Donovan with 1 year left on his deal. The more we wait, like, the less another team is going to be willing to pay. Unless Donovan gives you the wink, nod, I'm going to resign here, because years of having a star player is just as important as just like acquiring the star player. So it's not even so much that, like, I think we could, like I said, I think we could legitimately be the 13th seed, have like the 6th pick in the draft next year with Donovan Mitchell. So, which I think would still be valuable in next year's draft. So it's not even so, because like in the lottery, you might have the first odds and still end up with like a bad pick, So it's not even so much that. It's just like I want the most for Donovan because it's kind of inevitable in my mind. Like after the Jazz get the 13th seed, hypothetically, then Donovan's requesting the trade. Like he's like, nah, I'm not playing for this 13th seed team. And
then his value goes down even more because he demands the trade.
1 year less on his deal, trade demand that's public. You're getting pennies on the dollar. Or at least compared to what you could theoretically be getting from the Knicks right now.
Yeah. Which is why we're in the situation of we love watching the Jazz win, but for right now we kind of want to see them lose. And as much as we love Donovan Mitchell, we love seeing him in a Jazz uniform.
My guy.
We want to do something that's beneficial both for the franchise and for the guy, which is why we would love to see him be on another team next year so that hopefully Donovan can go. He can have a really successful prime of his career and somewhere that's in a win now mode, and the Jazz can really build up. So maybe by the latter half of the 2020s, the Jazz could actually be a really good team with some really strong young players on there. So for all the people who have been hating on our thoughts about the blow it up, hopefully this explains a little bit more as to why we feel the way that we do, because Donovan's trade value and how good we are even right now in the West, those are both two sad things to think about in terms of where the Jazz are going to be going forward. But as always, we love the Jazz. We're here to bring you all the Jazz news, and we will be back next week with some more things to talk about. As always, if you have things you do want us to talk about as we're getting into the fun, slow off-season part of the Jazz, feel free to drop any things you want us to talk about in the comments. We're happy to talk about it. We also have we are now on social media, so we're bringing that out a little bit more. We are now on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can find us all there, so feel free to follow us. We do have a new logo, which Kyler has displayed on his TV in the background. Even though we don't love the rebrand, we're still embracing the rebrand as much as we can with our new logo.
It would just be weird if we just went completely not Jazz colors. So
I know it's like we've been like 4 weeks. Like, should we change the logo to like fit the rebrand? But
yeah,
it's
we
been
had
painful.
the old logo for a while because we didn't want to switch. But being retro only, is quality for so long. We needed to switch it up.
Yep. So we made the switch. So follow us on social media. Drop any comments either on social media or on this video on what you want to hear us chat about. And we'll be back next week, hopefully with Landon. We'll see you guys later. Have a good one.
Peace. Miss you, Landon.